الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ومولانا أبو القاسم المصطفى محمد محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين ولعنة الله على أعدائهم إلى قيام يوم الدين. The month of Rajab has many different occurrences and occasions for us, as brother just mentioned, that we will soon be celebrating Mab'ath, which is the commencement of the mission of Rasulullah, which is the 27th of Rajab. Tomorrow night will mark the 25th of Rajab, which is known to be the martyrdom of Imam Musa al-Kadum alayhi salam. An Imam that many of us, when we think of this Imam, we imagine the suffering and pain that he went through in the prisons, in the dungeons. Al-Mu'adhab fi qa'r al-sujun, the one who was tortured in the bottoms of prisons. So in this 34 years that Imam Kadum alayhi salam was an Imam, there is many trials and tribulations that he had. In order for us to understand more about what he did and to value his life, we also have to understand the circumstances of his life. Generally speaking, I advise you, myself, your families, to encourage each other when we have a martyrdom or when we have a wiladat, to learn more about the Imams. Use this time, this opportunity, again, it will be tomorrow night, it will be on Saturday, to learn more about the life of Imam Kadum alayhi salam. Either that's from reading the traditions from him, about his life, or listening to something that causes you to cry for him. But regardless, we are sad when there are martyrdoms. Why are we sad? Because we believe this is the time period that this holy light has left earth. And that when we are happy for the waladat is when Allah blesses us with this light and brings them into earth. So when we look at the life of Imam Kadum alayhi salam, we see that he went through a change. That is when the power of the Abbasids began to solidify. Remember when we talk about Imam Baqir alayhi salam, Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, we talk about the traditions, how maybe either half or maybe majority of the traditions come from them. It wasn't necessarily that the Imam Baqir alayhi salam, Imam Sadiq alayhi salam had more knowledge than the other Imams. It meant that they had the circumstances that allowed them to teach more. But other Imams like Imam Kadum alayhi salam, a lot of his life was spent in the prison. Even while he was in prison, though, he would guide people and guide individuals. And if inshallah we have time, we'll talk about some of the guidance of Imam Kadum alayhi salam in prison. So we see that the Imam lived around 4 of the Khulafa, 10 years under the life of Mansur, 11 years during the life of Mahdi al-Abbasi. This is during his imamat. His imamat, 10 years of Mansur's life, Mahdi al-Abbasi, 11 years, 1 year of the life of al-Hadi, and 13, and who poisoned him, 13 years under the Khilafat of Harun. So therefore this is about 34 years. How was the time period? What were the Abbasids doing? People had hope that the Abbasids would come and they would rectify and change things that the Umayyads did. Because the Umayyads were oppressing Bani Hashim, the family. They were cursing Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam. But yet you see that the Abbasids, after they solidify and gain power, one of the things that they become known for is oppression of the Alawis, oppression of the descendants of Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam. Just how you have in many times when you look at the life of the father of Imam Ali alayhi salam, and you see Hazrat Abu Talib, for example, and some of the traditions talk about how much Iman the father of Imam Ali alayhi salam, if you place the Iman of, for example, Abu Talib and the rest of creation, the Iman of Abu Talib would be more. Such Iman, yes, he had to hide it in certain circumstances, but because they had hatred of Imam Ali, Today, you see that, those that are not well rehearsed on true history, they try to identify him, now the Billah, as a disbeliever. Even though he was one of the main protectors of Rasulullah, even though when he passed away and Lady Khadija passed away, that became the year of huzn, grief for Rasulullah. But you see that they projected this image of Abu Talib and Islamic hatred, which is false. Why? Because of the hatred of Ali alayhi salam, of Imam Ali alayhi salam. And we see the same way the Abbasids come and they begin to persecute. They begin to oppress more the Alawis, not allowing them maybe property rights, allowing them to be judged, for example, to be witnesses when in judgment, giving them more severe punishment in judgment, and making them have attendance and come and fulfill, for example, see who is here and who is not here, tracking them all the time daily. These are the life, what the Alawis had to go through. The second part of the dynasty of the Abbasids is known for corruption, how much corruption existed. Look a little bit about the life of Harun. Look at the life, and you see the books of Al-Aghani, the books of the musicians and those that would sing. How many of these musicians he would have in his palace, for example, 300. Sometimes he would pay a musician, a singer, which is haram, is haram, to sing. He would pay them 50,000 dinars, for example. One singer, 50,000 gold coins for performance. And you see the type of life that he had, the wedding that he had for himself, the corrupt lifestyle. They say during a time when Imam Kadum alayhi salam would give bread to people because people were poor in need of bread. The Khalifa of that time, every night for dinner or for their feast, would have 30 types of food, 30 articles of food to choose from which one. He would cook it, and then he would get a little bit of it, get a little bit of that food, and this is how he would consume his food. So you see a time of corruption where the Khalifa wouldn't hide his drinks, his alcoholic beverages. It was a time that later on you see that in the time of Imam Hadi, it became so bad that he would invite Imam Hadi, Mutawakkil invited Imam Hadi alayhi salam, and even offered the Imam to drink. So this is what happened to this path of Khilafat. Why do we say the Imam has to be chosen by Allah? Why do we have to say that the Imam should be infallible? Why do we say that the Imam should have knowledge from God? It's so that Islam will not be corrupted. Now I want you to imagine in Islam that you only have the Bani Umayyah, you only have the Bani al-Abbas, and no Imams. What would happen to Deen? Not only did the Imams revive Shiism, they also revived Sunnism in Islam. They wouldn't have anything else left in their religion if it wasn't for our Imams. During the time of Imam Baqir alayhi salam, the Imam would teach people how to do Hajj. During the time of Imam Ali alayhi salam, we have in Sunni books that people were confused about Salat, how to perform the most apparent thing in Islam, because they had forbid the traditions. They had not allowed hadith to be spread. And then Imam Ali alayhi salam is doing Salat. They were so far away from Salat, they're asking, what is this? What is this performance he is doing? And then it took people that were in the battle of Badr, because Badriyun are those that participate in Badr, they said, listen, Hada Salatun Nabi, that is how the Prophet used to pray. Imam Ali alayhi salam gave life again to Salat. The Imams gave life again. We'll say the third part of what the Abbasid used to do, they would fabricate hadith. The Imams gave life to Tawheed and oneness of God. During that time period, we see fake narrations that Allah has a face. Allah, for example, can be seen. That God has created Adam in His own image. And the Imams came and changed this. They came to Imam Rida alayhi salam. They said, Sif lana rabbak. Explain to us your Lord. And he would give the beautiful tawheed that you see in the beginning of Nahjul Balagha, one of the first khutbahs, of how Imams explain who Allah is, which is Kamal al-Tawfiq, is nafyu sifatu an. The perfection of Tawheed is separating Allah from any type of attributes, man-made or man-related attributes. For example, being limited to human body, being limited to time and space. Take that away from Allah. Quran says, لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٍ. I remember I said this before, I'll say it again, just to show you the different lines. There is this book called At-Tawheed of Ibn Khuzaymah. At-Tawheed Ibn Khuzaymah. Big Sunni, alim, muhaddith. Important. He goes through, and if you read this book, you will come to the conclusion that God is a human. God is like a human. He has human characteristics. For example, he sits on mimbar, the mimbar grunts. He's just like what humans do. That image of God is just like a human. Okay, this is one book, and he compiled this from all those traditions we're saying that the Abbasids were fabricating. He compiles it and puts it there. Fakhr al-Razi, who's Sunni himself, a philosopher, looks at this and says, these hadith are made up. He calls this Kitab al-Tawheed. Himself, he's Sunni himself, calls it Kitab al-Shirk. He says, this is the book of polytheism. What is this book? Where are these traditions, hadith like this? But I want you to now read Kitab al-Tawheed of Shaykh al-Saduq. Read Kitab al-Tawheed of Shaykh al-Saduq, which has narrations from Imams, from Ahlul Bayt, how Allah, what is Allah. So the third is that they began fabrication. A lot of this fabrication were hadithu tashbih, comparing God to a human form. I remember reading online when it came to Ibn Khuzaymah, some of the non-Muslims, those that want to attack Islam, and we say, hey, you believe in the Trinity, you believe in Jesus being, Isa alayhi salam being, in a human form, impossible. God cannot be a human form, possible. Christianity refute, for example, these arguments. Then this Christian said, did you read Ibn Khuzaymah's book, Tawheed? This has the same things we're saying. This has the same things. So know the worth that your imams saved you from shirk and polytheism, saved you from not knowing how to do salat. When we have 11,000 narrations, over 11,000 narrations about salat from the imams, from the Prophet and imams. They taught you how to do salat. This 250 years of physical imamat, they retaught everything, and we're in debt for them. The fourth, we see that it was a time of poverty. People were starving at that time, or the khulafa were eating. When we look at this time of oppression that Imam Kadum alayhi salam faced, and I think that, a lot of the circumstances that today we face and we see what is going on to the madhlumeen of the world, we also have to relate it and see, look at that oppression that the imams faced and see what the imams did. I don't know how many of you know the story of a Shahid al-Fakh. Maybe many do not know, but it's an important historical story. There is this person by the name of, even he has similar name to our Imam, but his name was Hussein ibn Ali. Hussein ibn Ali, who was in Medina. Hussein ibn Ali was one of the Alawis, Sayyid. He was Shia. And he was observing the oppression that was going in his city, Medina. And I want you to imagine how many Sadat there are in Medina. Because this is where Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam were. This is whenever the imams, most of the imams or all of them, almost all were born, for example, in Medina. A lot of them were born in Medina. And then they would go. Medina is the stronghold where the family of the Prophet used to be. But yes, in Medina they began to oppress those that were descendant of the Prophet, the Abbasids. So it became so bad that they began, the background of the uprising was that they began daily summonings of the followers of Ali Muhammad. They said, every day you have to show yourself. Every day. How disgraceful is that? Every day the government, what's saying they changed the government, there's every day whoever is Alawi has to present himself. Let's see what he's doing. This became daily summoning. And they would summon. Sometimes people would not be summoned. And they would say, okay, if you're not summoned, someone has to go in your place. And they said, for example, Hussein ibn Ali, who was Shahid al-Fakh, you have to go in the place of the son, for example, of Nafsu Zakiyya, Hassan ibn Muhammad, for example. And if you do not find him, you will be whipped for example, 1,000 times until you find this person. You have to be his guarantee. So this is a very difficult situation. The Alawis are not having property. The Alawis are being abused, and they're being daily summoned in their own city. Then you see misjudgment and unfairness when it came to judgment. They say they caught two people accusing them of drinking. One just happened to be Alawi, if it's true or not, whatever. The other was not Alawi. The first one, they give the punishment of 80 whips. They give him punishment of 80 whips. The other one, who's not Alawi, they give him 7 whips. 180, 17. So things were unfair, and people began to become upset. Like, what's going on? So someone like Hussein ibn Ali, now we don't know, did Imam Kadum alayhi salam tell him to revolt and fight? Or did he secretly say to do this or not? It's not necessarily clear. But regardless, we know that he had a very high status. We know he was one of the great shaheeds. We even have a hadith from the Prophet about this uprising, about the battle of Fakh. We also have remembrances of, from Imam Di'b al-Khuzai, one of the poets, talk about and do poetry about Fakh in front of Imam Kadum, those who were martyred in this path. So he begins an uprising. And Fakh is an area by Mecca, for example. But they take control around maybe 300 people. They take control of Medina. They take control, and what they start to do is they broadcast in the adhan of the masjid, the Shia adhan. Now we have Hayya ala khayr al-amal. And Hussein ibn Ali comes there and he leads the salat. The governor of that time hears this and he runs away. He says, I'm not going to deal with them. They were in trouble. We lost the city. So they begin, more people come, and they have victory after victory. They appoint a new governor in Medina. They take care of Medina. And around the outskirts of Mecca, Fakh is around, say, 4 kilometers around Mecca. There is this battle where the Abbasids bring 4,000 people and they kill 300 and they behead all of these Alawis. Things were so difficult that some of the Khulafa would have something like a museum of skulls of the Alawites and would put their names, this person. He would put their skulls and they would collect the skulls of the Shia. This is how, during the time, the Abbas was. So they bring the holy head of this Shaheed Hussein ibn Ali to Imam Kadum alayhi salam, and he is very upset and saddened by what happens, and therefore we see that the Imams cry, and he's sad, and this is, one of the ways that the Imams either directly or indirectly supported this revolution. Himself, he did not directly get involved, but either directly or indirectly, in a way, either he did or not, but he supported the revolution of Shaheed al-Fakh. So if they ask you who is Shaheed al-Fakh, it's during the time of Imam Kadum alayhi salam, the one who rebelled, took control of Medina, and later on was made Shaheed by the Abbasids. When we look at the life of Imam Kadum alayhi salam, besides this, the political, we see that Imam Kadum alayhi salam would use any way, methodology to guide people. And that's what the Imams do. Their primary function is to waken people up. When we look at each other, sometimes we think that, maybe the only way to guide someone is to have a majlis or mawlid or some gathering and have a sheikh speak on the minbar. Sometimes, little pieces of advice or good actions of khair are more important than the minbar, can cause more. For example, at the appropriate time, a piece of advice, one line of advice can cause more effect. There's this person that would come to the Imam, or the Imam was passing, and this is a popular story. There was a farmer, and he would use vulgar language against the Imam. Imam's companions wanted to deal with him. They were upset. Why could you curse the Imam? But the Imam knew how to deal with this person. And we look at the way of guidance of the Imam. He went and he asked this person about his farm. And he asked them, for example, how much are you going to get from this crop? He said, for example, 200 gold coins. 200. And the Imam offers him to buy his crop, his produce, someone who's cursing him. Someone's using vulgar language. He says, I will give you, for example, 300 I will give you 300 gold coins. He gives them even more. Generous to who? Someone who is insulting him. Now imagine us, personally, really. If somebody insulted you, would you be nice to him? No. Would you be the same to him? Maybe. That's basically fair. They say in terms of, ethics, if you treat someone with the same thing, that's the same. That's fairness, right? Would you do even more than that? Well, that's dhulm, that's oppression. So there's three types of ways to treat someone. If someone oppresses you or uses vulgar language against you, insults you, either you could do the same thing back. Whatever you say to me, you are same thing, for example. Or you could use it more. Whatever you said to me, your father is, your mother is, your grandparents are, for example, some cultures, they all the way, you curse the entire lineage, for example. That's worse. That's not allowed. Or you can learn what Imam Kadum did, which is fahard. And that's why his lagab is, Kadum, kadhmul ghayth, to take that anger when you're insulted and then to give that person, to benefit him. So he gives him 300 dinars. That person thinks to himself, and the Imams know who to be kind to, too. He says to himself, wait a minute, I just insulted him for so long. And now he offers my produce. And he says, keep the produce, keep the harvest yourself. I don't even want it. Keep the harvest for yourself. This is 300. Generosity to this person. And then it says that whenever that person changes and asks for forgiveness, that person says that whenever he would see the Imam, he would respect him. He would be so polite to the Imam. And now we understand from this is the way that the companions of the Imam said to injure that person, to harm that person, right? Or the way that Imam Kadum alayhi salam did. Many a times we have to understand that acts of charity, acts of benevolence work a long way. And something that inshallah one day we can encourage more, and we do sometimes at Yasin, obviously. Many times people come and ask us, and alhamdulillah we have to, a certain amount, that ability to help them. But something that inshallah we can encourage more as a community more is to have these funds and able to help more people in the community, help more that are devastated, for example, by natural disasters or different things that happen, inshallah, that we can help them. Another way that the Imam would guide, and this is a very interesting story, is that we see during our lifetime that one of the tools of governments and tools of people have been to use the lower desires to bring someone down. To use the lower desires to bring someone down. They would bring someone and tempt them to establish a relationship with someone, and they would use that to blackmail them. Governments, they do this. Many of them. And they blackmail someone. Or they have information about that person and they hold on to that information. Now they're going to use it. If you don't do this, we're going to do this. Harun tried the same thing and we have in the story. He tried to take Imam Kadum, but now he is in prison. He's all alone. And he brought someone that was, for example, a singer, a beautiful singer, for example, and made him a roommate with the Imam. Made her a roommate with the Imam. And after a while, he kept asking, what happened? What's going on? What's happening? What's happening? And this is one of the instances where we see the Imam alayhi salam, his infallibility. Because the Imam is not going to do something that is going to ruin his reputation. Obviously, do something that is haram. So the Imam has patience. The Imam has sabr. And many times there are people that we think cannot be guided. There are people that we think, oh, look at their life. How can this person be guided? Look at their life. And sometimes our imams, sometimes our ulama, they have given them a chance. And you see them do tawbah. So the same person, they see after a while of being to test Imam Kadum alayhi salam, they see this person in a way was worshipping Allah, was, for example, reciting Quddusun Subhanaka, Subhanak. They asked, why? What happened to you? And she stated that, إِنِّي كُنْتُ عِنْدَهُ وَافِقًا وَهُوَ قَائِمْ يُصَلِّي لَيْلًا. I was there present, but the Imam was doing salat. Now, the salat of the Imam is not like our salat. Our salat, our mind a lot of times is somewhere else. The Imam cries. The Imam sometimes doing wudu, they would shiver. Doing wudu, they would shiver. Or sometimes their abba would fall, they wouldn't pay attention, for example. Imagine the salat of Imam Kadum alayhi salam, the salat and witnessing the salat of Imam Kadum. And over in prison, he's doing salat. وَنَهَارًا, and day and night he's doing salat. فَلَمَّا انصَرَفَ مِنْ صَلَاتِهِ بِوَجْهِهِ هُوَ يُسَبِّحُ وَيُقَدِّسُ. If he's not praying, he is glorifying Allah. He's remembering Allah. So when you see, one of the best signs of Allah in front of you worshiping God, then she began to follow him in the same manner, and she did repentance. And therefore, they say that she lived, after this repentance, she lived a short life, a little bit after, but she lived after, died before Imam Kadum, but she was guided. So therefore, you see, sometimes it is by our action. Imam Kadum alayhi salam, the first instance with the farmer, someone who insulted him, he gave him actually a generous amount of money, and this changes someone. An act of benevolence to a place where you don't expect. Or sometimes it is that patience that you have to fight against your lower desires. You have to protect your eyes, your ears, you protect your mind, for example, from the test of Allah. The third thing that I'd like to say from the life of Imam Kadum, besides teaching and guiding people in the narrations that he would have, is that another person that he guided that sometimes we think don't deserve guidance are people that are having parties, for example. I don't know, many of you, sometimes your neighbors, for example, might have parties. There'll be, for example, alcoholic beverages served. And you definitely don't think that is a time for guidance. You just say, just let me leave him alone. He leaves me alone. We just don't want anything to do with each other. Well, they say possibly in Baghdad, Imam Kadum alayhi salam was passing by this party, alcohol or whatever is being served, and the Imam is passing by. And we said the Imams would use any opportunity to guide people. And he sees that this person is having this party, and he asked the slave, he says that, is the owner of his house free or a servant? He asked the servant himself, this person that's having this party, is he free or a servant? And usually what comes to mind is that, well, of course he's free, because a slave during that time cannot host a party, cannot invite people to have, and spend so much money. So he says, or she says at that time, yes, he is free, of course, he is free. Imam replies in the tradition, you're right. If he was a servant, he would fear his Lord. If he was a servant, he would fear his Lord. Yes, he's free. He's not a slave. So he actually is meaning something else by this. He's meaning something else by this. So he sends this message. It works. It goes to this person who's known later as Bishr al-Hafi. It goes to him, and he says, what did this person ask? And he knows Imam Kadum alayhi salam. What did he ask? He said, he asked, are you free or a slave? It's an awkward question. Are you free or a slave? And I says, yes, for example, you're free. And he says, basically, you're right, because if he was a servant, he would free his Lord. He understands the message that the Imam is giving to him. He runs without shoes. Bishr al-Hafi, Hafi means the barefooted one. He runs and runs to find the Imam, doesn't find him there. He runs and runs and runs, finding him, and asks him himself, what did you say? And he says, the Imam says what he said. And then he says, no, I am a slave. No, I am a slave. No, I am a slave. Why? What does this mean? It means that when a person is free, they're free to do whatever they want. They're free from the worship of Allah. They're free from the commands of Allah. They can do whatever they want. Insan wants this. Man, from the lower temptation, wants to be free to do whatever he wants. But what do you give up? What do you give up if you do whatever you want? You give up ubudiyat, being in the realm of being a slave of God, being a servant of God. I have this idea, and you can see if you agree with this or not. Just as the belief of God is natural for us, I also believe that worship of God is also natural, and that human beings like to worship God. They are inclined to worship. They are inclined to that being a slave. And when they are not, and they do sin upon sin, on sin, upon sin, they feel terrible because they have left the realm of the Rabb. They don't have a Mawla anymore. They don't have a Lord anymore. They get tired of this. And that is what repentance is. When a person sins and sins and sins, then, excuse me for saying this, as if they want to throw up. They want to throw up from this sin. Then they do repentance. And they say, God, I'm tired of this. I'm tired of following my nafs, my lower desires. I want you to command me. I want to follow you. I want you to, and that's what a Rabb does. A Rabb gives commands, and what we do is we listen and follow. And I think that if many people in the US, in the West, they just don't know the path, but they all are looking for a way to worship Allah. And this is the story of Bishr al-Hafi, that he missed that ubudiyat and that slavehood, which is Islam. Islam, the ta'bir of Imam Ali, the message of Imam Ali, the meaning that he says that Islam huwa taslim. Islam is submission. And it takes a little bit to wake someone up. Why? Because deen is fitri. Religion is in our nature. And the Quran says this. Quran mentions that fusuq, Allah made you hate fusuq. Allah made you hate corruption. وَحَبَّبَ إِلَيْكُمُ الْإِيمَانِ. Allah made you love Iman. God makes you love Iman. And this is the natural disposition of humans. But how far we have gone astray and how we have changed that, that's something else. But the natural human is fitri to know Allah, to worship Him, and to be a slave. Inshallah, we can be a servant of Allah. Please recite salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Finish tonight's discussion from an interesting hadith from Imam Kadum alayhi salam, and we'll do some musibat for him. Imam Kadum alayhi salam in Al-Kafi saw that it has been recorded. وَجَدْتُ عِلْمَ النَّاسِ فِي أَرْبَعٍ. If you want to classify knowledge of people, you can classify it into 4. If you want to write this down, or remember it, if your memory is good, you didn't have cheese too much, you can inshallah memorize it. But if you had cheese, then write it down. And you didn't have walnuts, then write it down. I think we're offering probably cheese pizza again, so probably write it down. It's much better without walnuts. The first knowledge is this. أَوَّلُهَا أَن تَعْرِفَ رَبَّكَ. The first knowledge of people is this, to know your Lord. The first is to know Allah, know your Lord. This is 1/4 of knowledge. Ma'rafatul Rabb. To know Allah. How can you know God? People can know God from themselves. It is natural, we said, to know God. But is this sufficient? People can understand Allah from aql and intellect. But is this sufficient? Can you know Allah more than the intellect? Or no, intellect knows God fully. One of the attributes as Shias, they call us adliya. Why do they call us adliya, Shias? Because we believe in the justice, the attribute of divine justice of Allah. Some, like the Asha'ira or most Sunnis, they don't believe in justice because they say there's no justice or injustice of God or oppression. Whatever He does is right. You cannot even say justice or not injustice. He can take 124,000 prophets and take them to hell if He wants. If He wants, He can do this. We as Adliyas say He cannot do this. God cannot take 124,000 prophets to the fire. Why? Not that we are forcing God, not from outside, from within. God won't do it. Just for example, you have a friend and they're very trustworthy, reliable. You know they'll never steal from you, right? So are you forcing your friend not to steal? No. But you know from within he has that attribute of being trustworthy. Therefore, you know he will never do this. So therefore, we say our mind can understand Allah as being just, for example. Or else we'd say, what's the purpose of the universe? Why should I even try to be a Muslim? Why should I even pray? If God can randomly put the believer in hell and the unbeliever, for example, in heaven, then why would I try? Why would I become a Muslim, for example? Right? So the first ma'rifah that Imam Kadum alayhi salam says is the ma'rifah of your Lord. And this is done by intellect, but question, I want you to think about this. Maybe I won't give should I give the answer or not? Question is, can you know God fully by the mind? Or does there need to be something else to help us understand Allah? I'll give you the answer. Of course, there needs to be something else, and that is wahi and revelation. That you can understand Allah, but to complete this ma'rifah, you need revelation. You need the prophets and imams to tell you who Allah is. Okay. Another type of ma'rifat of Allah is obviously, or not obviously, but that you've probably heard it so much, is al-ilm al-huduri, knowing Allah through the heart. Bika araftuk, for example, Imam Hussein alayhi salam, through yourself I knew you, not through anything else. Bika araftuk. Or, I don't need anything to prove you, because even that proof that needs to prove you is in need of you. Myself, my heart. I'm not going to get into it, but the first ma'rifah to have, and there's a long journey of us, to understand Allah. Long journey. By our mind, by the narrations, by the heart. The second type of knowledge, Imam Kadum alayhi salam says, الثانية أن تعرف ما صنع بك, to know what He has done for you. Right now, brothers and sisters, you're here. It means that you're healthy enough to come here. It means that you didn't have an emergency that you're here, right? It means, alhamdulillah, right now, life is good, that you had that opportunity to come here. For example, you know that Allah, not because it's my speech or whatever, but God has guided you that Thursday night, He wanted to forgive you. He wanted you to talk to Him. He wanted you to do munajat with Him. He invited you to speak to Him. Why don't we think about these things? How come, some of the narrations we have, from, I mentioned, about Imam Hadi alayhi salam, Abu Hashim al-Ja'fari, I believe. He came to the Imam. He was struggling financially. And the Imam asked him, what are the ni'mas that Allah has given you? Mention to me. And he was quiet. And then he begins to talk about what ni'mah Allah has given you, Iman, Islam, Qana'ah, for example. And I ask you, what has Allah given you? Protection, a good family, for example. Salamat, health. And go through your entire life and go through all those things that Allah has given. In mankind, the problem that we have is that we like to, forget these blessings of Allah. Some people said, anytime you see a miracle of God, or anytime you see one of your prayers answered, put a little symbol for yourself. That, Allah has answered this, Allah has done this for me. Remember, because insan loves to forget, but we love to remember what we have done for others. So think this type of knowledge. وَالثَّانِيَةَ أَن تَعْرِفَ مَا صَنَعَ بِكَ وَالثَّالِثَةَ أَن تَعْرِفَ مَا أَرَادَ مِنْكَ. Now that you know Allah, now that you know what Allah has done for you, then think and ponder and get knowledge upon what does He want from you? What is your wazifa? What is your duty? What does He want from you? And this is general, and this is sometimes specific. What is my duty right now? What should I do? There's a problem. You have to seek consultation with others, ask. See, what should I do right now? Or my entire life should be, what does Allah want from me? How can I perform that right prayer? How can I do the right khums, for example, calculate it? These things. This is a ma'rifah. What does He want from you? وَالرَّابَعَ أَن تَعْرِفَ مَا يُخْرِجُكَ عَنْ دِينِكَ. And know what will separate you or take you away from deen. Know the threats. Know the tricks of shaitan. Know that the threats that are facing your family members with social media, for example, with the internet. No, be one step. One of the problems we have is the parents are always one step behind technology. What if you were one step, for them? You could lock everything, for example, in that iPad before they lock it in a way that nobody could ever unlock it ever again, for example. You put so many passwords and so many limitations on screen time, they don't even know what to do. They know that they cannot, for example, trick you. You know everything. So always be one step ahead of technology. Steady, take time and see when it comes to your devices, when it comes to the threats, When it comes to the trends, research and see. Sometimes you have to educate yourself what's going on, or especially in school. Involve yourselves, for example, in school and who your child is friends with, what's going on in their lives, and yourself, so you know what can take you away from deen. So you're always one step before them, in front of them. And not that kid is always tricking you and always playing with you, and you don't know what's going on. Inshallah, we can have knowledge of our Rabb, knowledge of what Allah has done for us, knowledge what Allah wants from us, and knowledge that what causes us to leave religion. We can dim the lights now and cry for Imam Kadum alayhi salam. I don't believe that you need me to remember your Imam. Many of you have a good connection with Imam Kadum alayhi salam. And sometimes when you just say salam to him, that's enough for you to cry for him. We say salam to Imam Kadum alayhi salam. Assalamu alayka ya nur Allahi fi dhulamat al-ard. Peace be upon you, O Allah's light in the darkness of the earth. The earth is a dark place without Imams, without Quran. This prison cell of Imam Kadum alayhi salam is also a dark place. And he is the light of Allah fi dhulamat al-ard. Assalamu alayka ayyuha al-imam as-salih. Salam and peace to you, O righteous leader, the most righteous. Assalamu alayka ayyuha al-imam az-zahid. Peace be upon you, O ascetic leader. I don't know how your Imam suffered and was tortured in the prisons, but that maybe possibly they would only see an Abbas, that after being in prison for so long, they would only see an Abbas, a cloak, going back and forth and worshiping and performing the salat. When you look at the different ziyarats, you see one ziyarat that we have of Imam Hussein alayhi salam mentions what happened to him. But also you have the ziyarat that Misbahul Za'ir of Ibn Tawus brings. And it says, when you say the salam to Imam Kadum alayhi salam, also say this, wal mu'adhab fi qa'r as-sujun, also say the one who is tortured in the bottoms of jails. Mu'adhab comes from adab, to be tortured. How the Imam was possibly whipped and hit, so much so that at the end he would pray and ask Allah, Ya Sayyidi, najjani min habs Harun, wa khallisni min yadi. Allah, save me from the hands of Harun. What they did to Imam Kadum alayhi salam. Wal mu'adhab fi qa'r as-sujun wa dhulam al-matamir, and who was in the darkness of cells. Those who have visited the cells and dungeons of the Imams know it's not just a normal prison that you could see outside, that possibly there was no windows there. It was dungeons in the darkness, downstairs in dungeons. If this was not enough, your Imam, brothers and sisters, in this ziyarat says, Dissaq al-mardud bihalaq al-quyud, the one whose legs was bruised by the rings of chains. That Imam Kadum alayhi salam, in this ziyarat is mentioned that his legs were chained in prison. How does one perform the salat? How does one live while his leg is always chained up in a way that he is bruised? May Allah inshallah reward you, give you the ziyarat of Imam Kadum alayhi salam, grant you your hawa'ij because of Bab al-Hawa'ij Imam Kadum alayhi salam. Give us shafa'at of him in the hereafter. Allah, we ask you because of the Imam to cure our sick, inshallah. Forgive our deceased. Grant everyone's hawa'ij and make us, inshallah, of the followers of the Imam. Make our children of the followers of the Imam. And to expedite the return of Imam al-Zaman with a salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.